Good afternoon, everybody here with us at Atticus, and welcome to the latest Ask Atticus events. Questions and answers with members of Parliament in the heart of Westminster. My name is James Frith, and I'm Senior Counsel at Atticus Partners. Today, I'm delighted to welcome my friend and former colleague, Darren Jones MP, Labour's new Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Darren was elected MP for Bristol North West in June 2017. Until Keir Starmer promoted him to the Shadow Cabinet last week, Darren made real impact and a well-deserved excellent reputation as chair of the Business and Trade Commons Select Committee. His approach, a sort of economic headmaster, was widely praised by union members and business leaders alike, and just perhaps offers us a glimpse into the sort of leader he'll be in the Treasury should Labour be returned to government. Since his election, his time in the Commons has included membership of the National Security Strategy Committee, the Online Safety Bill Committee, and of course, grilling the Prime Minister as a member of the then Commons Liaison Committee, including, I think, telling one Boris Johnson that his own Chancellor had called for him to resign whilst he sat in front of the committee. Darren grew up in his constituency that he now serves, and after graduating from the University of Plymouth, worked for the NHS before reading law. He is married to Lucy, a tech entrepreneur, and they have 3 daughters, who I think you affectionately call Cost Centre 1, 2 and 3. So appropriately named
they get a job
for the new job. Yeah, then their revenue rise. Darren, thank you for being with us and welcome to Atticus.
Thank you so much.
So, welcome everybody here. First of all, congratulations on your promotion, much deserved. What are your first impressions of the new job, and what instruction from Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves have you had?
Well, thank you for the very generous introduction, and thank you everyone for coming out to be part of the discussion today. I'm grateful to be here with you. Look, we all know the challenges in the economy. You all experience that from the work that you're doing, but we also know the challenges we face across the country more generally. And so for the Labour Party, it's a question of our fiscal rules, which of course are non-negotiable. We will not borrow for day-to-day spending. We will reduce debt as a percentage of national wealth over the course of the Parliament. But with that foundation, also identifying how we would transform the country. And Keir Starmer has been very clear, you'll have heard him say it many, many times, that we want to take a mission-oriented approach to the country. So instead of just quick fixes to quick problems and quick press releases for media grids every day, we really want to get under the bonnet about how we fix the long-term problems that the country face. And that might not always be kind of sexy press releases. I'm really interested in how we procure data servers across government, for example, talk about that if you like or not. But they're kind of foundational pieces of work that we have to do to ensure that we can transform public services, deliver better for people, but also help transform the country in partnership with business workers and others.
Okay. So did you get a very clear sense of what your job was, your, if you like, the margins in which you'll be allowed to operate from Keir and then Rachel?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing to say was you never know whether you're actually going to get a call on reshuffle day, and you don't really know what you might be asked to do. I wasn't anticipating being asked to do this job, so my first day really was trying to figure out the answer to that question. The great thing from my perspective, I'm thrilled to be part of the core economic team, Rachel and Keir now. So in terms of preparations for conference and the manifesto and what we want to do for the country, I've been given a role that sits at the very heart of that, which is very exciting, but also a huge responsibility. For me, it's making sure that I'm ideally not just the person that colleagues think of as the person that says no to everything. It's more about how I get them to the right answer. And I think that would be a useful process for my colleagues as much as for me, because we're all in politics for the same reason, which is to transform the country.
So has there been a spike in colleagues coming to you wanting a line in the manifesto, a line in the next Labour government's budget already?
Well, of course, we've got conference coming up. So, politicians like to announce things at conferences. So there's a process around that, of course. But of course, my predecessor, Pat McFadden, who is enormously experienced and brilliant in many ways, set a very clear tone with colleagues about the fiscal rules and the state of the economy, and the impetus, therefore, for my colleagues to really think deeply about the types of reforms they want to make for the country. And that process seems to be working well.
On a personal level, you are somebody that enjoys ideas and you're a creative thinker and you enjoy quite public debate about a whole host of issues and topics that you're now faced being responsible for. Is that a challenge to hold your tongue and not commit by accident to a Labour government spending plan?
Well, I mean, we will announce things in the proper way, and I'm bound to collective responsibility now, like the rest of my colleagues. As a backbencher, you just get to kind of say things, right? So it's quite, you have that kind of freedom. Ideally, sensible things based on evidence and understanding, which is how I always tried to do it. But the important difference for me now is that as a backbencher, albeit as a Labour MP, I was trying to influence the debate through my interventions and my work, whereas now as Chief Secretary and the team, we're having those discussions in private internally and making decisions about how we're going to do things. So it's a change, but it's obviously a welcome change from my perspective.
Excellent. As I said in my opening remarks, you built a solid reputation, no nonsense approach as the chair of your committee. What will your approach be to UK PLC now? The levels of expectation you had on the people that would come in front of you and the scrutiny that you applied. What will be different if Labour are in government to your approach on that as chair of the committee to your approach as chief secretary?
Yes, I mean, in committee, you're holding people to account and you're trying to get answers to questions. And actually, the sessions that became more kind of interesting from a media perspective is really how the witnesses answered the questions, not really how I asked them. From a government perspective, though, the whole point of mission-oriented government is this new partnership is really important. So, I might be Chief Secretary to the Treasury in the Labour government, we will have ministers, but we know how difficult it is. Government can't just say this is going to happen in the country and it happens. So how we work with business and other stakeholders is really crucial to delivering those public policy priorities. And so I think you'll see a new type of relationship where, many businesses said to me, for example, they go in and see current ministers about issues that they don't always feel like they're listened to, or one department might listen, but then the Treasury kind of doesn't let anything happen, and that can be quite frustrating. Keir's direction to all of us is that, all of us have some responsibility for economic growth, for example, and therefore the level of coordination, I think, across Whitehall, we hope, and then in partnership with stakeholders will be new and different. And we should all know where we're trying to get to as a country and the role that each of us therefore play in that journey.
And have you been tasked with a 100 days plan, or is talk of a 100 days plan an old way of thinking? What's the current readying for government that's going on in the shadow Treasury team? Yeah,
the 100 days timetable is really a leader of the House question. So Lucy Powell is the new shadow leader of the House. That's just so that we can prioritise any legislative work that we need to do and be clear with colleagues and each other about how that might be prioritised in the sequence of that work, and thinking about that in advance of the election, because you win the election on a Thursday, Friday morning you're in. It's not like in other countries where there's a bit of a transition period, so you have to be ready to hit the ground running. That's what the 100-day kind of timetable often refers to. But from my perspective, it's a bit broader than the 100 days. And clearly, there's a first 100 days narrative around spending and economic policy that we will need to approve and sign off as the shadow Treasury team in advance. But we're not kind of constrained to the 100 days. That's just an ongoing thing we have to do.
I remember when Keir began, he talked about this talk of missions and around economic growth. His challenge to the shadow cabinet was bring the ideas that aid economic growth. That every policy has to have some contribution to economic growth. Where there are commitments already publicly known about raising additional revenue, raising additional money, we're to assume that they'll be done pretty quickly, aren't we, if the Labour Party is to make the impact it wants to make in those first months in power?
Well, I mean, so our commitments on tax changes are very, very limited and very narrow. So they're the private schools VAT tax, it's the private equity carry forward, and it's the non-dom status. That's it. And so there will be no surprises around kind of tax policy. One of the things that I'm very interested in is working with colleagues to say, well, actually departments spend quite a lot of money anyway every year, and it's a kind of longer term thing, not a 100 days thing, but we've really got to think about how we deliver public services better within current budgets. I'll be asking everybody to think very deeply about that, because you're not going to get sign off from the Treasury team for any additional sources of money if you've not thought about how can we actually reform this in a more fundamental way within current budgets and current behaviours.
Which talks to Keir's principle around things like preventative care, thinking in the NHS, and that sort of expectation on colleagues.
Yeah, and look, these things don't just happen overnight. They're not easy, but you do have to take that direction of travel, because otherwise you're just constantly firefighting and you're not solving the fundamental problems. And there are lots of examples of that across different departments. And Keir's instructions to all of us is that it's our responsibility to think for the long term.
Excellent. Okay. I will be coming to the room for questions, so please have a question ready. We had a number submitted as part of the registration for today as well, which I'm going to come to now. Slightly more policy, quite varied, but you're going to have to get used to the variety of questions around spending and policy. When you served on the committee for the draft online safety bill, you've been very vocal about the need for changes in how we police the online space to keep children safe. And because of actually the Labour, so the votes in the Lords actually made this possible by Labour supporting the amendments to the bill, Ofcom will now be investigating Apple and Google app stores to stop children from accessing adult content through their stores. Are you pleased that large companies like Apple and Google will be better held to account for keeping under 18s away from adult content? And do you think this is the start of some redress between legislature and these large multinationals?
Yeah, so look, I'm pleased the online safety bill is very, very nearly there. I mean, we started talking about this, I think, even before we were elected in 2017. Yeah. And I've been involved with it very closely as a backbencher, as a member of the pre-legislative scrutiny process before I joined the front bench. And Alex Davis-Jones, who's our shadow minister, who's done a brilliant job on the Commons side. In the House of Lords, Bevan Kidron, I mean, she's just remarkable. And a load of the things that she's managed to get government to commit to, and there is an enormous legacy for her work. The bill is a kind of, it's kind of an imperfect beast, really. It's had a lot of changes as it's gone through over the years. But it's a good start. I think Ofcom have been gearing up, and I'm quite confident in their abilities to be able to implement that. But it's not perfect, and it's not at the end. So there's probably, we're going to have to learn some lessons and maybe iterate it a bit over the years.
Okay. On research and development, obviously crucial, particularly with this economic growth, go for growth narrative. It's crucial to ensure that the UK is at the cutting edge and can reap some of the economic benefit around innovation, whether it's biotech, AI, decarbonising transport, and the list goes on. What are your recommendations for how the UK can sufficiently support R&D, and what will you be advising Sir Keir Starmer to do? I would just also say, and many of us will know in the room, there was a lot of heat and debate about who would get the DSIT job. So your answer could well have been in a slightly different guise, but clearly there's an interest there from an economic and treasury perspective now for you.
Yeah. So I should say Peter Carr is going to be doing a brilliant job at DSIT. He is somebody that works really hard, is a great kind of people person, and I think is going to do a really great job building that new team up for us on the Labour side as we take that into government. And he's got already some great shadow ministers in his team that have been working in this area for a long time. So I'm really pleased with how that's come together. In terms of research and development, I mean, we do pretty well anyway as a country. So it's not as if we have a huge fundamental problem we have to fix. The question is, how do you maintain our level of performance, and how do you optimize it as best as possible? Horizon was one big headache that the government's just managed to fix. We think that could have been fixed sooner, but we're glad they've got to the right place on that. This is the EU research programme that the UK is now associated back into being involved with. And I think that's a huge relief to the R&D community. So the question then is really, how do you help specifically increase private sector investment in R&D? And how do you make sure that the environment facilitates that level of investment? Because whilst we're pretty good as a country, we're still a little bit below where we should be in terms of the OECD averages on spending on R&D. and the public sector plays a part in that, but also private sector investments are a really important part of that ratio. And so we're going to have to work with people about how do we create the opportunities for that to grow whilst maintaining our excellent kind of base at the moment.
And this speaks to Keir's earlier remarks, does it not, on the need for a new partnership with business? Are these terms used in shadow cabinet? Are they used in the development of this thinking? And on a practical level, if you're looking to ramp up spending on a particular initiative over a period of time, what vehicle within the Treasury is best to spend that money through, and to pull those levers to have that control if you're committing to that new partnership?
Sure. So on the first question of partnership, yes, it's crucial. I mean, I heard this all the time as chair of the business committee. I mean, how on earth can you make an investment decision, especially a big investment decision in the UK, when policy changes so much, when there was so much in flux, whether it's in terms of our relationship with Europe or elsewhere? I mean, it's impossible to kind of model the potential return on your investment or the risk. You're not sure about availability of talent or infrastructure. I mean, it made it very, very difficult for investment decisions to be signed off. And so the kind of stability piece, missions, the new partnership piece, you know what we want to do, we know what you want to do, this is the direction of travel, we think is going to be really important. So there's a kind of cultural change to what's been happening in the last few years. In terms of how money gets spent, of course, you have the spending departments that will spend in the normal way, but the control is me, basically.
Okay. And so your approach to what will ease a conversation with a money department's conversation with you? What will you be determining? I think the value for money office, that's the commitment for the Labour Party. You'll be working with them. Presumably they'll qualify something, and if it's not value for money, you'll approve it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the business case process, which many will be familiar with. I'm conscious that the Treasury is often seen by departments as being too slow. So there's a question about how do we make sure that everybody understands the priorities of the government so that the sign-off process can be more efficient. And I think that's something that comes from that policy stability. And also, as you know, a shadow chief secretary of the Treasury, as I was saying earlier, I want my colleagues to see me as someone that's going to help them get to the right answer. So instead of just kind of sitting in my office and waiting for somebody to say a business case, I'm actually going to be more proactive in engaging with those teams and saying, what is it that we're trying to achieve? Let's go through the current budgets. Let's try to see how things are being done now. Let's look at what opportunities we might have and how do we try and get to the right place so that we can show the difference the Labour government will make to the country.
The Labour Party for a long time has been, I think, prone to worried about being seen to be backing winners. I've never understood this, that a government shouldn't try and back winners. I think that actually a government should probably try and back as many winners as they can. And from an economic growth point of view, that does mean governments have to consider risk very seriously, don't they? But some of the fastest growing industries will begin with quite a lot of risk. Is the job of this new partnership to help shoulder some of that risk with private investors playing their part?
Yeah, and the private sector relationship is really crucial because, I mean, there are things where there's 100% public sector spend, you know, in public services, take that bit kind of out. Everything else, though, in terms of economic growth or kind of where the state is co-investing in strategic infrastructure, you know, those business cases have to stack up in partnership with the private sector, because if we're using taxpayers' money to stimulate economic growth or to secure jobs or to secure strategic infrastructure to be delivered, it won't be the government delivering that, it will be the private sector delivering it. So how the state unlocks those opportunities, money is only one part of that, planning and regulation and other things as well, is really, really important. And you need that kind of confidence and sign off from the private sector about their ability to deliver in order to get consent from the Treasury that is a successful business case. And again, that goes back to the heart of this new partnership, is that we've got to work together on the detail of that, keep each other kind of true about performance and outcomes and management of contracts and delivery, and really deliver for the country, which is what we all want to do.
You already mentioned the procurement with a slightly geeky answer on data service for government, which you can riff on maybe.
It's one of my hobbies.
Yeah, well, your hobby. One question we received: how can UK procurement create innovation, growth, and productivity across the UK, supporting the goals of devolution and Labour's mission to make the UK the fastest growing G7 nation? Yeah,
it's a very big question. I suppose the heart of that question is about government procurement. One thing that I'm personally interested in, but I haven't started any work on, is the Conservatives in government have had a few attempts at trying to bring innovative companies into the government procurement kind of supply chain. It's not really worked. There's been lots of blockages for companies. If they're pre-revenue companies, they're essentially just not allowed to bid. If they're small companies that don't have, I think it's like a minimum of £1 million indemnity insurance cover, they're not allowed to bid. You know, some of the larger companies that get lots of the government contracts, unlike in the US, don't necessarily get innovative smaller companies in their supply chain to help deliver these projects. And so I think there's a bit of an innovation barrier there that will be interesting to explore. You obviously have to manage risk effectively and make sure that delivery is going to happen. And in new technologies, you want to make sure that those technologies are being tested and validated in the right way. But I think there might be some work there that we could do to think about how do you create the circumstances there to allow more innovative companies to actually be part of the delivery discussion, as opposed to just closing the door to them because they don't tick some boxes.
What is your data server judgment? The government hopeless that is it not all cloud first?
Well, it should be in the cloud. The issue which I won't talk about it very long. The issue that annoys me the most.
I know there are a handful of people that absolutely would only want you to talk about this.
Well, you just tell me to.
My pressing.
You just tell me to stop when you want me to. Each department procures their own IT. Some departments are better than others. Contract management is not very good. Pricing agreements have not always been negotiated in the right way. Your ability to change things within those contracts has been often limited by the contract negotiations. And as a consequence, you get this like very bitty piecemeal kind of hardware and software kind of setup across different departments, which doesn't facilitate public sector reform and modernization. And there are lots of old data servers that, because they're locked into contracts, you can't do interesting things with. I mean, the police, for example, I mean, this is all public record, but they've got such old computers. They've been in breach of the law for years because they've got loads of innocent people's faces on the national computer database. They've been promising to fix it for years and they just haven't. And a lot of it is like not very sexy stuff around data servers.
But it's also about harnessing that data for other means, right? Is it?
Yeah, but you can't do that unless you've got the hardware and the data in the right place to be able to facilitate that process. There's then a question about kind of regulation and privacy and effective governance and oversight of the use of data and public consent to do that. But you can't even get into any of that if you're not allowed to access some data portals over here on a server that doesn't is not interoperable with another service over here, and it's a bit of a headache that really needs fixing.
The anecdote I heard that at the outset of COVID, the civil service were running Excel spreadsheets for people volunteering, whether it was to make masks or just offer the use of a van. The central database kept as a spreadsheet as opposed to anything remotely smart.
Huge productivity challenges associated with that. I mean, in my city, in Bristol, I think it was 2 years ago, for the first time, they'd received some money from the NHS so that the two major hospitals could actually talk to each other digitally. So when they discharge someone, so they're giving you a physical piece of paper that you have to take to the other hospital, they can actually just send it. I mean, really basic stuff. I mean, that shouldn't be kind of the new exciting thing. No. And there are lots of other examples where that needs to be fixed because it will improve the delivery of public services, it will improve outcomes for the public, and it will reduce the cost of running them because they'll become more productive over time.
Okay. Final question pre-submitted before I come to the floor. What can the Labour Party in its preparations for government learn from Welsh Labour, who are in government in Wales, for example, on the environment, ensuring that recycling rates improve with statutory recycling targets for local authorities?
Now, I confess, I don't know the answer to that question, but I will check. I mean, the broad political narrative around recycling is obviously very important, and the criticism of the government right now is that they've put a load of regulation on the food and drink industry around the circular economy and recycling packaging, for example, which of course is something we all support. But each local authority takes a different approach to what recycling facilities they have locally, which makes it very difficult for national businesses to run a system that works properly. And DEFRA and Deluxe, for whatever reason, just haven't brought that issue. I don't know why they haven't, but it seems an obvious thing to try to fix.
Are you a keen recycler?
Yes.
Yeah.
In Bristol, we were way ahead of the curve.
I think Bury's doing better.
I think we were actually, we were recycling food. I think I was actually at sixth form when we started recycling food, and it gets turned into biogas for our local buses. So we're very good at it in the city of Bristol.
All right, that's a smarty answer. Okay, so we're going to come to the floor for questions. Please, if you could give us your first name, where you're from, and where you're from, and you'll ask your question. I will then. Do you want me to repeat it for the sake of those online, so they can hear it online as well? So please, yeah, indicate you'd like to come. We'll take in questions in threes.
Yes.
Do you need a pen and paper?
I can do it on my phone.
Okay.
So I don't
Go for it.
Thank you. Hi, Simon from EY. Could I raise corporate governance reform, something which I know obviously you were close to on the Business Trade Select Committee?
Yeah.
Clearly the government have not been as quick as they hoped with a number of the reforms they set out. Any insights from the Labour Party yourself would be super appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. So Simon from EY asks around corporate governance reform and Labour's perspective on that. Thank you, Simon. Hi.
Hi there, I'm Will from the Aerospace Technology Institute. I just wanted to ask about regional policy. So one of the challenges the UK has is not just how do you generate growth, but how do you do it outside of London and the South East. Conservatives try to own this super levelling up agenda. What will Labour do differently in that on that?
So thank you, Will from Aerospace, and he asked a question on Labour's equivalent to levelling up, which is a question actually that I should have asked already. That's the next question. Yes.
Ian Mace from Associated British Foods. How confident are you that your new Labour government will be able to push through planning reform?
Ian from the Association of British Foods asked about Labour's confidence in pushing through the planning reforms. Excellent. We'll take those three and then we'll come back to the floor.
Great. On governance reform, I mean, gosh, how long have we been waiting? I was kind of half expecting the government to announce another consultation on their previous 4 consultations. Thankfully, they didn't do that. It's, as far as I'm aware, it's not in the King's Speech again. Just before I finished chairing the committee, I wrote to Tony Badenoch about that. There will be a reply that will be published soon, but I'm pretty confident the answer is that the government's not prioritising it, which is a shame. Labour has committed to following through on those recommendations from the consultations. The interesting debate, and my colleagues in the business team will have to think more about this and say more about this in the election, is how far does the bill go? Because it started off with just looking at audit, and then it was kind of audit and corporate governance, and it very quickly became a bill where lots of things are being attached to it. I think it's better to do a smaller bill that's anchored in the evidence around the consultations, and to get on with it, given that most stakeholders and the regulator all want it to happen, have been asking for it, and have been waiting for it, and quite frankly pretty annoyed that it's not coming. On regional growth, I mean, and thank you for all of your work in my neck of the woods. I mean, it's a classic example where if you do successfully get great businesses and great people, you do secure investment. You know, there are many challenges internationally around securing investment right now, but there are great businesses in the west of England who, even though the Americans keep offering them tons of money, refuse to go, not just because they're British and want to stay, but because actually their access to talent and skills in the west of England is just not available in America. They don't have that expertise, so they wouldn't be able to do what they were going to do. You know, we want to see lots of those kind of opportunities across the country, and I would say that our messages around devolution and allowing more decisions to be taken locally as part of our broader industrial strategy and our Green Prosperity Plan kind of investment program will hopefully deliver those types of outputs, because a lot of the work that happened in the west of England, as you know, didn't happen because someone here dictated it. It's because the heritage and the people in the region really worked hard for it and delivered it, and you'll want to see those kind of opportunities in other parts of the country. In terms of planning reform, look, it's pretty central to the delivery of some of our missions. Keir said himself, you know, that our plan to decarbonise the power sector by 2030, which is a really bold target, you know, is going to require pretty significant changes to planning law. which for energy infrastructure, we think is kind of broadly anchored in the nationally significant infrastructure planning regime, and thinking about consents and grid connections and those types of reforms. And you will see those coming forward, because unless we speed up that process, we know we're just not going to deliver on our mission.
Great. Yes, please. Yes.
Also from EY, but I swear we have.
Oh dear. Right. Okay.
One of the consistent complaints of government is that, or this government at least, is that the policies are being created in silos, whether it's critical minerals or semiconductors or life sciences or CBAM, and that there's no joined up thinking across the whole of government. How does Labour plan to address that issue?
Yeah. So Sally, also from EY, has asked on how does Labour mitigate against policy development in silos, which this government is making the mistake in doing. According to the question, yes, please.
Hi, so I'm Laura from Zero, the small business accounting platform. So building on your data point earlier, I also think it's about digital capability within Whitehall, and in fact there's a public accounts committee report out today. And tackling that, so I'm thinking HMRC, ability to deliver e-invoicing or to make tax digital, which in turn will unlock growth for small businesses and productivity. So how do we tackle that part of it in terms of talent, skill and capability in Whitehall? And is there a role for the private sector in co-creating some aspect? I know the Australian Tax Authority do a lot of co-creation with software industry.
That's an excellent question. Laura from Zero asks about Whitehall's capacity for digital, making tax digital, digital transformation. Yes, please.
Hi, Richard from Open Banking. My question is about how will Labour unlock the value in the data economy through supply side forms like smart data?
Richard from Open Banking asks about supply side reform in banking. So,
Great.
varied questions, aren't they? Goodness me.
It's like a mental workout.
You've not even got power yet.
It's great. No, exactly. Sally, policy silos completely recognise the diagnosis of the problem. It comes up all the time, and I've said it a million times when I was chairing the select committee. I think there are two questions then about how do you fix that. One is the perennial issue of kind of Whitehall coordination, and obviously there's the sign-off process and the writ round and that type of stuff, but it's obviously not working with the current government, so you can't rely on that to be the answer. Sue Gray's just joined us. She joined the day before I joined the shadow cabinet, and one of her tasks has been to think through how a Labour government would structure and run itself in order to deliver this kind of mission-oriented approach. What changes would be required to ensure that that's meaningful in terms of its output. So I suspect we'll have some more to say on that soon. The second question, Laura, on digital skills. I mean, you're totally right. There's no point in like buying all this fancy kit and doing things differently if no one knows how to use it. And so I've always seen digital skills as part of the kind of the kind of infrastructure change that's required. Because we see that in the private sector as much as you do in the public sector. On co-creation, previously I thought that some of the big tech companies did a really good job in providing training modules for free to the public. If you want to go learn about generative AI, I won't name which ones, but there's lots of providers. There's stuff on the internet that's free content that maybe not that many people know about. So there's some great examples, I think, of co-creation, and maybe we could do more if we're in government in terms of signposting people to that and sharing it. And then the last question on smart data. I mean, there's kind of the regulation question, and then there's the actually using it question. And I mean, the open banking process is, I mean, you will know a kind of standout example of that working really, really well and underpinning a lot of the fantastic reforms we've seen in retail banking on banking apps. I would love to get us to a similar position for public services. Wouldn't it be great if we had government service apps that worked in that same way, made people's lives so much easier, whether an appointment or getting access to information or knowing what's going on at your kid's school, and allowing innovation to flourish within that ecosystem. But to do that, you've got to get the kind of nitty-gritty hardware, data pools, cleaning the data, labeling the data, having the people that know how to do this, fixing any procedural issues around sharing of data in the right, proper way, how you guarantee privacy and cybersecurity if you're going to do that in a kind of pretty significant way. And so I want to get to that outcome, but what I'm saying is I recognize how hard that is, and it really needs to be a long-term strategy that everybody signed up to delivering if you're going to get there.
Excellent, excellent. Right, show of hands. James, we'll go 1, 2, 3. Go for it. We'll come to you. Especially you. Yeah.
James Dunn from DXT Technology, a tech multinational, and looking at co-creation in that space with the government as well. So maybe we can talk later too. I wanted to come back specifically to the question on hardware because you've mentioned it a little bit there. So when it comes to a scale, the central government departments have pretty good hardware compared to the rest of the public sector. For us, we're a strategic supplies government. We do a lot in the cybersecurity space, and our single biggest red flag as a strategic supplier is the legacy IT in the wider public sector. Particularly, you mentioned the police, but particularly in NHS and particularly across local government. Data centers, absolutely could talk about all day, but when it comes to the physical hardware, it's the reason for the NHS attack in 2017 was because we were running on Windows Vista. That situation hasn't really changed.
Right.
So it sounds to me like you're saying that Labour are going to make a fund for hardware innovation in the wider public sector, but would love to hear your thoughts now.
You see what he did there?
I see. And if you go, that's right, you've committed.
I just agree with that.
That's a verbal contract right there. Very clever. It's not just a rodeo. Sir.
Val from the Food and Drink Federation. Just how developed are your plans around the missions and what sort of engagement and consultation you're going to do?
Consultation around the 5 missions,
Yes.
Labour's 5 missions.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, please.
Brian Burns from FinTech for Moneybox. So we look after about 1 million aspiring first-time buyers, including tens of thousands in Bristol. It seems like home ownership is going to be a key battleground heading into the next election. A lot of the communication from Labour seems to be around the supply side. So we need to build more houses, which we absolutely do. But there's also something there on the demand side in terms of making it realistic for people to save on house deposits, for example. So is there anything there from a Labour perspective and team in terms of balancing that conversation with the demand side, in terms of continuing things that are there already in terms of lifetime ISIS, or is it laser focused just on the supply side and building more houses?
Right. So James, no, I'm not committing to a new fund. But we both recognise the problem. One of the things that I want to look at is how effectively are we spending existing capital budgets? Because we do spend quite a lot of money, and we spend it, the capital budgets year after year after year. And you might not want to say it on broadcast, but my understanding is that how we manage those contracts, how we get synergies between departments, how we make sure that we're kind of procuring these things in the most sensible way doesn't really happen. There are too many examples of a department being like, oh God, our contract's about to expire for X, which means service Y is going to fall over. Quick, who do we give money to fix it? And then it's kind of sticking fast. Oh, phew, great. It's not the official's fault. It's just that, well, maybe it is, but it's just that the process doesn't really fit. And I think that from a Treasury perspective, where you're having to get spending control approval or business case sign off for your budget, there's probably stuff we can do there to try to improve that and make it clear to everybody that that can't continue to happen, not least for the cyber risk point that you've picked out of all the legacy systems, let alone trying to improve public services in the long run. On the missions, I mean, the missions are the missions, so they're going to be at the heart of everything. So to answer your question, we have just finished the National Policy Forum, which is our internal Labour Party kind of process, which will be published at conference, which is coming at the end of October. We're then going to obviously start writing the manifesto process, looking to be ready for a potential election in May, maybe, and we will publish it when we know the election's coming. But the mission, the detail in all of that will flow from the missions. That's the whole point of them. And they'll all be anchored in the missions. So you will see a lot of detail that comes through on every page of the manifesto, delivering the overarching missions of what we hope will be the next Labour government. On helping people to be able to afford to buy houses, I don't think we've said anything specifically about that yet. I know the team recognise the problem and they'll be wanting to think about it. I suspect it's something that we'll need to have a watching brief on as we get nearer to the election and we have a clearer picture about what the spending commitments are that we can or can't make in the manifesto.
Okay, question from the back, and then any raise hands. Great, we'll keep going.
Good, very nice to see you again. We have a number of members from the diplomatic community in the audience today. What would be the principal point of cleavage between the Conservatives and Labour in terms of how to attract foreign capital and enterprise to the UK, and how to assist UK PLC in achieving their growth aims abroad? One other personal question, if I may, I would say that you are probably seen as one of those consensual politicians, certainly from the Conservative intake. And now that you've entered the shadow cabinet, we're going to see different dialogue.
The gloves are off. So Leon, one of our co-founders hosting us today from Atticus, asked around foreign investment, and on a personal level, are the gloves coming off now? You've got to. Well, you've not stopped writing to the Chancellor, have you, since you were?
And he keeps replying.
I think that's super. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Next question. Yes.
Joe Milligan from Liberty Steel. Obviously, there are going to be a lot of calls on taxpayer money and very constrained economic conditions, at least in the initial phase, for the next government, hopefully later one, given its commitment to steel. What do you expect, or what would you like to see in terms of headlines from the first comprehensive spending review that obviously you would be involved in as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, in addressing a lack of foreign direct investment and the competitive environment, obviously, in which global players that exist in the UK are competing with policies from other countries for investment in infrastructure and critical infrastructure?
Joe, I think that's a very ambitious question. You wouldn't commit to data surveys, so I'm not sure we're hearing corporate spending review commitments. But that's an excellent question. So, well, as you begin to think about what a corporate spending review would entail under a Labour government, that would be good to cover. Yes, please, Charlotte.
Charlotte Cross, another accountant, there's a lot of seated the question really, you're talking about the government's digital journey and the idea of digitalisation, which indeed should deliver. Government has a woeful record, in my personal opinion, on any IT projects. HMRC are absolutely really bad. But how are you going to do that differently so it does deliver? And also, more than that, how are you going to bring along the big employing groups, the big unions, to embrace that change? Because it always seems, I think, certainly again from my perspective, there's a lot of resistance to change. Sometimes for good reason, sometimes not. But they have to be part of the journey to make it work.
Yeah. So Charlotte, I'll say a similar question to the one around digital capacity, but IT projects have come and gone. They've been successful and very often unsuccessful. The size of these projects is still going to be required. How are Labour going to do things differently, and how do we mitigate against that record of failure that has existed? Not everywhere, but for a large number of.
Yeah, sure. So the first question on foreign direct investment. There's not many things I give Boris Johnson credit for, but I'm going to give him credit for this one thing, in that he set up the Office for Investment, which was a good idea, but it's been badly delivered. And the Office for Investment was supposed to be a kind of Whitehall front door for potential foreign direct investment to have a conversation with government in a kind of coordinated way. Because the trouble we have is that, the Americans are brilliant. The Germans are also really good at saying to businesses or investors, here are all of the things that you can invest in. Here are the things we're going to give you alongside that. And how do we help make the case for you to come here and do this? And I should also say, apparently, we're very British. We're quite polite in that we don't ask businesses to come here and spend money. We go to France and Macron's like, I want you to build this factory here. Is that all right? And they go, yes, okay. But we just don't ask for things. And so you've got to fix that whole kind of cultural environment. Now, the reason the Office for Investment hasn't worked, but I think is an opportunity to make it work, is because you had a front door, but you opened the front door and it was just chaos behind the front door. So I had companies that wanted to invest in my region who would get in touch with me and say, who do I talk to? Because you've got a city mayor, a regional mayor, a local enterprise partnership, a powerhouse. My project sits between business and trade and transport. And I've spoken to the British Business Bank, and I've spoken to UK Export Finance, and I just can't figure out how this whole thing stacks up. Who's going to help me understand how I make this stack up so I can do the deal? Oh, there's no one there. And so it's our job to coordinate all of that, but also to spot where some of the off-the-shelf products may be need updating so that they're more relevant to businesses to secure that investment. So I think that's a really important part. And also the policy stability piece is really crucial as well, because certainly for big infrastructure, these are long-term investments that you need to be able to show security and stability around in terms of the payback period. Joe, I mean, I can't comment on
the gloves off. You got Leo's second question. Gloves off.
Well, I like to think on the select committee, I gave people, you know, a good set of questions. I just have to do the same now, right? So, as I always said when I was chair of the select committee, it's not really me asking the questions, it's how the person answering them answers them. And the government has to answer questions. I mean, there's already been a couple of interventions from me this week where, you know, in my view, the Conservatives have been all over the place. They really don't know what they think about a whole host of issues. And it's my job as part of His Majesty's opposition to highlight that and to ask for clarity, not least because we need to know from the opposition side what it is the government plans to do with that money one way or the other, so that we can think about what our response might be. So it's really important that, you know, these questions are answered, and I'll just continue to answer them. But my approach to life has always been kind of work hard, be nice, and help other people. And I'm going to continue to operate on that basis. Some Conservatives get a bit confused. I quite like you, but you're also like really mean. I just got to answer the question. So I'll keep operating in that vein. Like I said, the first spending review, who knows, we'll have to see when we get there what the books look like, what the country looks like, and all that sort of stuff. The stuff that we say going into the election, though, will clearly be anchored in all of that in that process. But I think your point on investable propositions is broadly similar to my previous answer, in that we are not winning the deals because we're not in a position where investors have confidence in the UK right now, apart from very specific deals that have very high political salience, where ministers are willing to go out of their way from the Treasury to do a deal with a particular company, and then other companies in the sector or the broader supply chain say, does that help me or not? And what about the broader ecosystem? And then there's no answer. So we've got to kind of fix that whole process. And I know you know that. I know you know that better than I do. And then lastly, on digital transformation and change, I mean, there's a whole host of issues in there. The first thing I say is, even though there's been lots of failure, that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It's about how do we do it better? Because I do not see a way through either on economic productivity or public sector reform without getting digital transformation right. I mean, I just don't think there is another option, basically, to fix those big problems. So we have to fix it. The change point is really important. We looked at this a lot on my select committee, and it's often quite simple. It's just about involving people from the start and trying to make sure that people understand what it means for them. So the bad examples that we saw on the select committee was where companies had integrated technology into their processes, often in a very successful way from a business perspective, better productivity, better customer satisfaction, better profits, but they forgot to ask their workers about it from the start, or they forgot to think about, actually, how do we create an environment in which our human workers are happy and satisfied, because that's important to us, and they don't feel like it's about stealing their job or reducing their pay or being surveyed or oppressed by the technology. And so I think there are some pretty basic kind of cultural points that can start to make that whole journey a more positive one. I've said previously in newspaper interviews about the whole piece around tech, if you ask workers generally, I think they're quite fearful of it. They don't really know what it means, and they just worry their job will go. You have to flip that debate so that it's not just seen to be, but delivers the prospect of better work, ideally better pay, and a better lifestyle for people and for businesses across the broader economy. That requires leadership from the top. It's one of my pet topics, and for a long answer. My reflection is Francis Maude, under the Cameron government, made a really good start at this. And then when he went, it kind of stopped. Matt Hancock, to be fair to Matt Hancock, when he was at DCMS, he did some pretty good work on this, but he was moved pretty quickly. And so if you don't have a ministerial sponsor that requires this digital transformation to happen, it can just fall away in the priority lists, which is why I'm interested from a Treasury perspective, is how do you kind of build the foundations to ensure that that's the direction of travel for the long term that everyone agrees to in the broader system, not just a particular minister that has an interest in data sets.
Okay, we are very nearly out of time. If anyone has a burning question, there were some other hands that went up that haven't since been put up. No? Okay. Oh, we have got, yes, go for it.
Hi, I'm Alex, and I'm from Samsung. Yeah, on public and private engagement and collaboration, absolutely welcome that. Do you think that there is still a little bit of work to be doing around government or a new government to come in to really understand what commercial decision making actually means, so you can have realistic delivery timelines, so you don't get the bad PR, I guess. But then also thinking about actually what are the tools that government actually have to do this? She said like creating demand and thinking about supply and having a little bit of a rethink about what that actually means and what the government can do to kind of point, I guess, businesses in the right direction.
So clear objectives to the missions. If the missions are the UK PLC business plan, what are those indicators of success along the way? What's the objective? Asked by Samsung. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of political narrative around a new partnership assumes, I think, hopefully correctly, the kind of conversation is ongoing and you're kind of integrated into some form of kind of machinery of government mechanism that means that we all understand what the deliverables are and that you have a kind of vested interest in the long-term delivery of a project, as opposed to just announcing something, moving away, and then like being on your tail and not maybe being helpful in trying to unblock the problems that government could unblock to make these things better. So it might seem like a shallow answer, but I do think that kind of new partnership and that new relationship thing actually in practice is really, really crucial. Any supplier that supplies something to a customer wants to have that type of relationship. That's not existed with government, and we need to find the space and mechanisms for that to happen properly.
Excellent. Well, that concludes today's event. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you all for your attention and the questions that you've asked. Please let's show our appreciation for Darren.